Hey everybody, it's time for a Patron Only Q&A. You're the people who help me the most out of all the folks on the internet. So thank you for your questions and for making my life a lot easier. First question comes from Jim Battle. If you weren't a musician, what do you think you'd do instead? Well, lately I've been doing a ton of animation. Folks have been hiring me to make animated music videos ever since I made 2 videos for Adam Neely earlier this year. And I've been spending a ton of time doing it, more than I even want to be honest, but it has been a wonderful way to sustain myself as an artist and a source of income in between tours, and it's also very creatively satisfying. I think ideally I'd be spending this time more on music, but you gotta take what comes your way. So that's probably what it would be, since it's already happening. Animation. The next question comes from Alejandro Alvarado. This is both a music question and a suggestion for the patron rewards you were mentioning the other day. I love music and am trying to get good at it. It is one of the very few things that gives me genuine happiness and pleasure. I'm pretty much always motivated or in the mood for practicing. The thing is, I'm struggling with depression and anxiety and also have a full-time job, and that makes it so difficult for me to be organized and manage to do all I need to do and take care of all my responsibilities in order to have time to practice. I'm motivated to practice, but lack motivation to get my time organized and lack energy to do everything quickly to have time. I especially struggle with getting out of bed in the morning, which makes me late and ruins my plans for the day. I want to know if you have tips to help me be more motivated so that I'll be able to be consistent with my practice time. I was thinking you could have a reward that consists of you sending a small motivational message each week or so to keep our eyes on the prize. I feel being pushed by a musician I look up to could help. Well, that's obviously a very important question, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. The first thing that comes to mind that's helpful is to look at your practice goals and look at your general goals in small, manageable steps as much as possible. So when you're stuck in bed and you're just feeling like, I don't want to be awake today, and what's happening is it's kind of hard to imagine something good happening, and so it's like your brain just gets you stuck. It's just hard to imagine any great reason for getting out of bed, and then when you're stuck in that state, of course then all of your goals fall apart. So the first thing I'd suggest is to try to make the goal you're aiming for, that first initial goal of the day, not to be, alright, I want to practice 8 hours today, I want to make sure I take care of myself, I want to make sure I go outside, I want to do this, I want to do that, having some long laundry list of things that you'd like to do in order to consider yourself productive. Instead, what I'd recommend doing is say, alright, my goal today is just to pick up my guitar once, or to plug in my recording equipment, or to turn the metronome on and play for 5 minutes. Set these minimum goals that are attainable even if everything is falling to shit. It's sort of like, people get into a pretty decent habit of brushing their teeth. Not me necessarily, but most people, or many people do. And I think it's because it's a small enough thing that you can do it regardless of how your day went, regardless of how much energy you have. So if you can find little starting points that you can definitely do any day, no matter what. And it could be as simply as writing a few words in a journal, or just playing 2 chords. Setting some minimum goal that is really, really small is actually, I think, the best way to start poking cracks in the wall of depression, at least in the way I've experienced it. And everybody's going to be different with this stuff. But it just seems to me that the idea of giant goals sometimes is paralyzing. And the idea of, you're obviously in love with music fully. And that amount of love can also be sometimes intimidating to hold. It can be intimidating to look at music as this incredible magic force, because then suddenly, in order for you to do it justice, you have to be so fully enveloped in it and fully engaged with it for it to even seem like you've done a good job. But tiny little things, even just tuning your guitar up, put you on the path and help you slowly find your way into some sort of a routine that becomes habit and is a meaningful tool when you're fighting the hardest days. And if you don't get to it, if you have a day that you see as a failure, don't focus too much on it. Try to look at tomorrow and see if you can just do a little better each day. Evelyn Haim, I've never known how to pronounce your last name, Evelyn, but it's a good one. Release date for the new Bentley album. Also, was touring Europe fun? Was there good bread to be had? Sorry, that's 3 questions. Sorry, not sorry. Alright, well, you know, you're spot on about the bread. The bread in Europe is great. And touring Europe was super fun. The latest Europe tour we did was a month-long tour opening for Haken and Vola. And we actually rode on a bus this time. We shared it with Haken, and it was different from any other tour because I was able to do other stuff during the day and just kind of have consistent sleep and consistent habits, and everyone was really nice, and the shows were really fun, and the audiences were great, and the music was good, and like I could hear everything really well. We had our own sound person, light person, so the tour was just incredible. I mean, it was everything I've hoped for. And honestly, now that I've done it, I do feel actually a deep satisfaction from it. It's like a lot of things you expect, you do them, and then all you want is more. But I feel like I experienced that. That was really good. And yeah, we're going to keep going, we're going to keep pushing, but some part of me is kind of like, is just kind of satisfied with having done it. Just at all, ever. So it was a great tour. I came back and I felt good. And normally I get back from tour and I just feel like I need several days for my spirit to catch up with my body because I've been moving so fast. And the new Bentley album is going to come out this year. And I can't give the exact release date yet. But I also have a new Ben Levin Group album, and that's going to come out in May. Very soon. Joseph Alvarez asks, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? Has touring on a global scale given you new insight on people, politics, and or music? So, a Tootsie Pop, is that a type of music? I can't think of a good joke, but I just bite too quickly. I chew on those things, so I've never figured out how many licks you're supposed to have to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop. Has touring on a global scale given you new insight on people, politics, and or music? Well, yeah, you know, I think when you tour and you travel a lot, you see, like, that we're all more similar than we are different. Some evidence of that is simply that when you go to other countries and you see their cool shit that all the tourists like to see, and you recognize that it's in this other country, in this other culture, but I appreciate it, they appreciate it, people from all the other countries who come to this country to visit appreciate it, and these like touristy spots that are appreciated, or these foods that are appreciated, it's kind of a universal thing that we all like this thing. So even though this thing makes, like the Eiffel Tower for example, makes Paris stand out, it also unifies us in a way, because it's like, well, the thing that's cool over there is cool to me too. And I mean, I know like your average person who lives in Paris doesn't necessarily find the Eiffel Tower to be amazing, but generally speaking, I think everyone's a fan. You know, same thing with like really old temples in Kyoto. They're like awesome. They're awesome things to be around, and you know, that's what people in Kyoto think too. Otherwise, they wouldn't go through so much to preserve them, and like they wouldn't be so important. So the things that people like are a thing that we all have in common. Everybody cares about food. Everybody cares about family. Everybody cares about art and music. It's just a very, how should I say, small world after all. We have differences that are really seemingly situational and they seem like kind of, they're deep in some ways, but they're like super surface level in other ways. That like, it's like if two people come from a different culture and have a different expectation about like etiquette, or how a conversation, what like the I guess the language behind the language, those language barriers and cultural barriers can make for a lot of confusion between people, but then also like it's the kind of thing that with a good explanation and just a little bit more exposure, the confusion goes away and people kind of understand where each other are coming from a bit better. It's not that hard to do. So yeah, I'm one of those people who... Darn, I was not recording. Yeah, so I'm one of those people who thinks we're more alike than we're different. Buzugu asks, it seems you're involved in a ton of stuff. Video making, Bent Knee, Ben Levin Group, animating. How do you allocate time for all these projects? Do you explicitly assign chunks of your day to certain things? Do you have equal motivation for everything and don't have time to think and don't have to think about time management? Are there lessons you've learned in the process? Well, I've been, busyness comes in waves. Like, you're always busy, but there are different shapes to it, and sometimes I'm like scared that I won't be able to get everything done, and that's the kind of busyness that's not that fun. But yeah, I do a lot of things at once, and I basically work, I wake up at 10, go to sleep at 2, and I think there's like 2 hours in there that I'm probably not working. So how long is that? That's, what is that? That's 12 hours from 10 to 10. Then you got 4 more. So yeah, 16 hours. So I work about 14 hours a day. But I have fun while I'm working. And I have a pretty fluid way of organizing my time where whatever the time is that I have for working on it, I'll like have an estimate for how long I want to work on each thing, but I'll let myself go over or under depending on how it's going. I'll take extra breaks if I am stuck, or the opposite. Sometimes I'll push through if I'm stuck, and it's pretty fluid. But I've learned a few lessons that I've learned. One is you need deadlines. So anything you care about, anything you really want to get done or see happen, you need a deadline. Anytime someone gives you a project and is like, hey, do you want to play on my thing, or like, do you want to collaborate, you should try to suggest and create and agree upon deadlines, even if no one's externally like saying this has to be done now. You should try to make those internally. The deadlines are the best. That's what makes it so that a project that's stressing me out in April doesn't keep stressing me out in May when all the other projects appear in May. And it's also what makes it so that you don't just keep starting things without finishing them. So that, to me, the most demoralizing thing when I'm working is to have something that I worked on for a really long time that never gets finished. That makes me really unhappy, and that's usually just because not good enough deadlines, not good enough communication about deadlines. Seth Seabolt asks, I recently checked out the Justice Cow album Fanfiction and really loved what I heard. Not only is Jessica's songwriting top-notch, but the mix is spectacular. I was blown away by the separation of all the instruments on the song Real Problem. Nothing was fighting with each other, and each instrument has its own place in the mix. It sounded super clean, while mixes without this quality often sound muddy. What is your approach to combating this muddiness that plagues so many an audio engineer? Also, do you do mastering yourself, or do you have a studio do that? So thank you, Seth. So yeah, Jessica's album Fanfiction from her band Justice Cow is super good, and I mixed it, which was fun and hard and good. Alright, so I'm glad you think it sounded good, Seth. That's so important, of course, to enjoy music where it's so textured and layered like hers, and made in mostly in like home studio situation. So so the mix has to be really good, and it's something that I'm not like amazing at. It's something I'm working on. But I think the key to decreasing muddiness and having a good mix is really to have the arrangement be really good. So like picking instruments that really do fit together in the first place, writing parts for those instruments that really gel. For instance, like it's pretty easy to mix like in terms of getting everything to sound clear and separate. It's easy to mix, let's say, bass, drums, and keyboard and voice. Like if you have, especially if you have like nice isolated sounds, you have the drums and then like electronic bass, a female singer in the high register, and then keyboard that does pads. The pads will take up whatever frequency space they take up. The drums will take up, a lot. The bass, whatever. All I'm saying is, it's pretty easy to mix that combination of instruments if their parts are good. Meaning if the keyboard isn't playing all these redundant bass notes that the bass is already playing and holding down, and if the vocals sit in their own space, and if the drummer's not hitting the crash every time the vocalist sings. Like hitting the crash while the vocalist is singing, it makes it harder to hear the vocals. That's kind of intuitively clear, but it's something we don't always think about when we're in recording mode, because anything can be louder or quieter. But yeah, if your arrangements work in the first place and they're nice and clear, then you're going to have a much easier time mixing all these instruments together when you're talking about clarity. Also just the quality of the sounds coming in. If you don't have to put any effects on the vocals and they already sound really cool, it's going to be easier to mix with them. If the drums already sound pretty fat and like have an energy to them when you record them, then mixing is just about exaggerating what's good and not fixing what's bad. So it's all about the arrangements and the sounds coming in. If you focus on committing to those in the recording process, you'll have a better time mixing. And committing to those, that's another thing I want to mention. When you commit to your sounds and don't change them in the mix, like say you decide on a pad and you really stick to that pad and you don't plan on changing it later, your mindset shifts to one that I think leads to better mixes. So if you're committed to, let's say, the keyboard sound, and then you're going to record guitar over it, whatever guitar sound you choose, if you're planning on committing to that, you can make sure it works with that keyboard sound, because that's the real keyboard sound right there. Whereas if you're planning on changing the keyboard sound later and you're planning on changing the guitar later, it's hard to make decisions about what's the good sound coming in and what's going to really work in the arrangement. Whereas if you commit to your sounds in advance and don't plan on changing them in the mix too much, then you're constantly building and building on top of something that is meaningful and is going to stick. And then I do not do the mastering myself. I would always recommend having someone who didn't mix it master it. Just get the extra set of ears and experience and expertise. And I go with, every time I do mastering, it's the same person. It's Randy Ruse at Squam Sound. He is a Berkeley professor and a wonderful guitarist and a really good friend at this point. We've been working together for, I guess, about a decade or so. And he was one of my teachers too, and he masters really well, and he has a really fair rate. And I just recommend reaching out to him, because it's like the last step of your project. Let's say you're pretty happy with your mixes, you send them to him, his mastering will make your mix sound better. It always happens, and I'm always like, yes, so much better. I'm always amazed, so he's the man. Thanks for the question so far, everybody. We got Matej Chirchek. Are there even any intermediate resources on rhythm? All I can find is either basic stuff like note durations or some far out 913 polyrhythm shit. If I just want to write a fun chorus, there's all these resources on what chords to use and how and why. But the rhythm? Just feel it, I guess? That's a great question. I'd really be interested in, he goes on, I'd be really interested in an analysis of what effect different subdivisions of 4/4 have. What happens when you transition between them or superimpose them? Maybe something about pickup notes or something. I just like to study this myself, but I don't even know what terms to think in. Yes, that's a great question. So, you're right, the internet is, and a lot of people are really fascinated with polyrhythms and these complex rhythm things because they kind of tickle They like scratch an itch we have that's kind of specific, and until recently no one really made that much stuff about it, at least on YouTube, and now it's like, you know, easy to find. But yeah, catchy rhythm, like, the resource I recommend is to listen to drum parts and bass parts as the way you start listening to songs. So normally we listen from the top down. We listen to the vocals, and then maybe we hear the guitar and chords, and then we hear the drums and bass in this hierarchy from top down. I mean, that's at least how I default. I'm like vocal centered, riff centered. But if you listen from the kick, drum, bass up, and like the first thing you're centering your attention on and the thing you're listening to the most is how the drums and bass work together, you're going to start to get these groove ideas the same way you might get vocal ideas. You know, you can probably make up a pretty catchy melody kind of intuitively when you hear chords and you just like trying stuff out. Well, the same is true about the rhythm if you are focusing on rhythm and you're listening a lot. And now that's not enough. That's a good start. The next thing you want to do is actually transcribe some beats. And I don't just mean the drums. I mean the way that like the whole groove and the instruments interrelate. For instance, if you listen to like a hip-hop track and there's a sample and then there's like some drums and then there's like some pads, the way that all of these come in and come out, where they sit in the range, when they enter, when they exit, what they're doing, transcribing that sort of stuff. And by transcribing, I don't mean necessarily writing it out, but learning to play it on a drum machine, or just on your desk, or on a guitar, just going ticka ticka and then hitting bass notes, just approximating it, trying to figure it out and enclose it in in like a part for some instrument. You'll pick up a lot from that. So just going dun 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 dun, that by itself has a charm, but then what you do over it greatly affects the groove. So if I'm singing with what's happening, da 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 beep ba 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 di da boom ba di da ba ba da da, that has a feel to it. And then if I go against it by like singing quarter notes or something, that's got a different feel. Dun 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 ba ba bum ba dun 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 da bum 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 da bum bum. So you can see the difference between going sing da say ba 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 da it's in a bum ba di up a bum ba da ji so in ma sika ba in ba is it the bum ba. That first half was with the groove, and then the other half was against the groove, and me singing against the groove created a groove in itself. So I don't really necessarily have a book to recommend, but I have a way of thinking to recommend. Listen from the bottom up and start to learn these rhythms. And finally, we have Zamka asking, if you could have some artist remix your album, who would it be? Multiple answers are much welcome. Well, the first person who comes to mind would be Flying Lotus, because I think he could take anything I throw at him and make a completely unique work of art from it, which would be really exciting just to hear. You know, he's got really amazing ideas, and just to hear what he would think of for what I'm doing. I would be interested in hearing a band like Big Thief, which is like a more minimalistic kind of Midwestern sounding indie rock band. I'd be interested in hearing them like reinterpret one of my more complex kind of weird pieces, because I feel like they've got really good taste too. So the producer who is like the in-house producer for Top Dog Entertainment, which is Kendrick Lamar's label. It's like, I think it's like a collective, and a label. But anyway, they have a producer named Soundwave who's like the in-house guy. I love everything I've ever heard that he's been a part of, so I'd be really curious to hear what he would do. So thank you everybody for all these wonderful questions, for being my heroes who help me be able to have a nice life, because we live in a world where it's kind of hard to make money in general, and if you're an artist, it's nice to have new tools coming in while a lot of our old tools are kind of going away. And so thank you for being here with me, and I just hope you're having like a really wonderful and meaningful year so far, and that it's full of music and cool adventures. See you in the future. Bye bye.